What's up, everybody? I hope you're all having an awesome afternoon because it's about to get a little bit weirder. So, if you saw the title of the video, we're doing a tier list today, and some feathers might get ruffled because we're not doing it based on arbitrary power level, and we're not doing it based on how likely I think the deck is to win an event. Oh no, we are doing it based off of my average experience I have had playing against the opposing deck's pilots. So I know that sounds like a lot. All it means is I'm going to be ranking all the top 25 to 30 decks in Modern based on how I think the interactions have gone. And to keep it a little more fair, we're going to be going off of 3 general rules to keep things in order. Rule number 1, I can only use personal experiences. I know there's plenty of he said, she said stories out there. I don't want those influencing the rankings. I don't want to take into account so-and-so's LGS that has a really salty Neoform player that flips the table every time. I don't know. I can't verify, so I'm only taking my experiences into account. Rule number 2, I am giving additional weight to occurrences that have happened at large paper events where I have never met the opponent before. I don't know anything about them because I think that's a little more representative of the average experience. For local events, there might be some tips and tricks that I know to help keep certain opponents from getting salty, and I think that's a little bit of an unfair weighting if I have additional knowledge that the average person wouldn't have. And then rule number 3, I'm giving a reduced weighting to online interactions. I do try to keep the chat box off as much as possible when I'm playing Moto. There are occurrences of players coming through that have a little bit of a short fuse, and I think behind a screen, everybody feels a little bit braver, says things they don't necessarily mean. So I don't want to take that with as much of a grain of salt as in-person paper events. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the tier list maker and see what kind of nonsense we can throw together. All right, it's time to hop into our rankings here. So just a few notes to go over before we start the actual process of evaluating all the decks. The S through D tier ranking that you see on board, going from salt of the earth, the most unpleasant players on average to play against, all the way down to D tier for absolute delight, because we're trying to find the saltiest individuals. That's the top of our scale. So D tier being the friendliest on average, people that don't give you any trouble, have a good time, make the entire experience enjoyable. The cards down below represent the card that I think is most representative of the general archetype. So you'll see things like Tarmogoyf for red, black, green X, mid-range decks. You'll see Elvish Archdruid down at the end for elves. I don't even know if they still play Elvish Archdruid, but it's the card that came to mind for me. Now, there are 34 different decks that we're going to be putting up on the board. Now, that's a little bit more than I said for the current Modern, and there's a reason for that. The reason is I included some kind of curveballs in here with historical significance so you can get an idea of where the list kind of scales, because there's going to be decks on here that people have played against previously that might not be playing current Modern for whatever reason, or there's going to be decks on here that current players have never played against, and you can kind of see how salty those pilots were on average to play against back in the day. So let's go ahead and jump into it. We'll start off pretty strong with Lantern of Insight here. If you've played against Lantern Control, you probably know it more as a deck that has induced more salt from its opponents than it has from its pilots itself. So for that regard, it's kind of tough to evaluate because I don't think it's fair to put Lantern as a very salty pilot deck, because most of the Lantern players that I've played against have been fairly chill individuals. They understand that their opponent isn't about to have a good time over the next 50 minutes. So I don't think most of them are instigating any sort of interaction or really trying to like twist the knife there as the match goes on. So I think I've had mostly neutral interactions with amulet players in general, not amulet players, with lantern players in general. So I'm gonna put them somewhere in the C tier. B would be a little more of not doing anything of any significance across the course of the match. I think Lantern gets a little bit of a less salty step than that because they're usually pretty understanding people. They know what they've signed up for. They know what you're gonna expect of them, and they typically act accordingly. So good job, Lantern players. Number 2, Psychic Frog. So this is everything from like Oculus to Frog Tide. It's not the Blink decks. Those are in a separate category. But most of the blue, black, X, mid-range, tempo, control style shells. I know obviously the bias here is I want to put Frog in D tier. I want it to be like the friendliest of the friendly players. I don't think that's the case. I think most of the Frog opponents that I've played against online have been reasonable, but that might also come with like some amount of name recognition. It might come with players not wanting to be perceived as salty on a stream of someone else. So I don't want to assume too much. In paper, I've honestly played against a lot of pretty salty Frog players. There's a lot of condescension in the Frog community as a whole, which I wish there wasn't, but they can really come across as pretty abrasive. So I think I'm gonna put Frog in A tier. I don't think it's like the saltiest of the salt, so I have a problem putting it in S tier, but I do think Frog's gonna end up like pretty well towards the top of A tier. And I think I'm actually gonna change the A tier name to Abrasive. That's a good descriptor. Tron. So obviously there's current Tron lists, and then there's Tron lists of days past that have a little more consistency, a little more high-end potential. I think the Tron players of current are less salty than the Tron players of past. The Tron players of past were really bad about if you disrupted their Tron lands at all, they were kind of tilted. But I think nowadays Tron's gotten so many tools with cards like Ugin's Labyrinth and Kolaghan's Command, even back to Karn the Great Creator, that they kind of understand they have a lot more game than they used to. So I believe Tron is going to be our first put into B tier. This is going to be like the tier for decks that are just a neutral experience overall. I think previous Tron saltiness kind of balances out the current Tron non-saltiness and gives us something somewhere in the middle. So I don't think it's fair to put them too far down. Let me see if I can change the image real quick. Square, I think work. That. Our size a little bit. Easier to see everything. All right, back to it. Number 4 is Hogak. Like I said, I'm going to throw in some decks in here that are not in current modern, but to give you some scaling idea of where I'm putting the salt to the rest of the players. The Hogak players that I had a in-person experience against personally, I think we're all fairly upstanding people. They really seem to understand that they were playing a deck that everybody hated, a deck that was completely inherently broken, and recognized that like they were the villain every match. Really similar to the Lantern players, but I think the Hogak players were actually a little bit nicer about it. Most of the ones I played seemed to understand like they are just doing this to win. They apologize ahead of time, but that's just their guide. That's what they're rallying behind. I think the Lantern Control players aren't necessarily always playing Lantern Control to win. So I think the Hogak players were a little bit more upfront about their apologies regarding the deck. So I'm going to put Hogak like, I guess technically it would be a little bit farther because we're going like top, left to right, right being the lowest. So I think Hogak is the closest to D tier of the C tiers so far. Brood Scale, Basking Brood Scale, new Eldrazi based combo that's come around in the last couple of years. Where do I think Brood Scale has been? I've played against a couple Brood Scale opponents that got a little bit unlucky. I don't think they were overly salty about it, just like frustrated, but not taking it out on anybody. So I really feel like Brood Scale is another B deck. I would say if they weren't frustrated at all, I would take neutral as leaning towards positive and put them in the C tier. But I think because they were frustrated, they just weren't frustrated at anybody. Just that's the way the cookie crumbles, so to say. I think I'm going to keep them in B tier. But I think I'm going to put them closer to C tier than Tron because I think that they're a little more controlled. They're a little better about not expressing their frustration at you. They're just frustrated in general. Where the Tron players are more like, I had another piece of land destruction, I see. And that's where it's like directed in your face. And I don't think the Brood Scale players do that. So I'll give them a B tier. Charbelcher, Goblin Charbelcher. Haven't gotten to play against Charbelcher too much in paper. It's mostly been online. The paper experiences I've had have been pretty neutral. Almost to the extent of like not saying much of anything the entire match, which is kind of funny. I did have a good testing series against Charbelcher with a player at, I think it was definitely at Charlotte at the hotel we stayed at, who was a pretty nice individual. So I'm going to take that into account and I'm going to move Charbelcher to C tier. I don't think on average they've been overly happy or overly positive, but they haven't been negative, and I think they've been better than neutral. So I'm going to put them as the best C tier so far. Remember, this ranking is the top of C tier, the far left side is closer to B tier, and the far right is closer to D tier. And if you're farther on the right, you're generally happier out of that group. So I think Belcher players have been, in my experience, a little bit happier than Hogak players. Burn players. Burn players are pretty happy. I'm not going to lie. The vast majority of Burn players I've played against in paper have either been really optimistic individuals that just like knew their deck was always a top deck away from winning or losing. Played a lot of collective brutalities into Burn, and for the most part, none of them got very upset. So I'm definitely going to put Burn players in D tier, at least the ones that I've played against. Obviously, your personal experiences might be different, but I think all the Burn players that I've gone up against where games came down to the wire, went one way or the other, they just kind of gave, yeah, happens. Just needed one more top deck, whatever the case may be. So I'll put them like on the lower end of D tier. They're not the delightest of the delight, but I think they're the first one that I would put in solid D tier. Through the Breach. So this could be Through the Breach Eldrazi currently. This could be Through the Breach Goryo's in previous iterations. Mostly Through the Breach Eldrazi currently. What do I think of Breach? I've had a few local experiences with Breach recently that have all been positive. So I don't think I can put Breach as a negative experience, anything salty or abrasive. I think they've been more positive than B tier, so I'm gonna look at C tier. Trying to think of all the players that I've played against at like bigger events, how they acted in general. Yeah, I think Breach is kind of like between Belcher and Hogak. I've had a lot of neutral experiences with Breach. I've had a few positive experiences with Breach. So I think the average leans towards C tier. I might actually put them between Hogak and Lantern. Like they're not negative, but they're not as outwardly, I'm sorry about this match as Hogak. Yeah, I like that. I think Hogak's a little more proactively friendly compared to Through the Breach. So we'll go there. Next up is Emery. So this is going to be like our affinity style decks. Anything Mox Opal, Mox Amber. I'll even go back and include the Oko decks. Oko, Emery, all that stuff, Gilded Goose. I'll include those in this list. And I'm going to say it's pretty neutral. Like I've had good experiences against Emery players, but they're mostly players that I know locally, and I said I wasn't going to weight those as hard. So I don't want to say all of my Emery experiences have been good, because there've definitely been some big paper events with Emery players that were a tad on the saltier side, but there've also been some good ones. Is it enough to balance out? I think I'm putting Emery the lowest of the B tier, and it's probably going to stay there. It's like closer to C tier, obviously, than A tier, but I don't think I've had enough bad experiences at Emery to make it like not on the borderline. I could see it being in C tier, but I think B tier, I think like the neutral spot is pretty good for it. Next up is Hollow One. Oh boy. And that's actually a really tough one. So Hollow One in its current iterations, I haven't gotten to see a whole lot. This is another like more historical one similar to Hogak. It's got a lot of Lantern vibes in that when Hollow One does its thing with Burning Inquiry and messes you up, typically the player playing against Hollow One gets a little more salty than the Hollow One player themselves. So I don't want to say that's necessarily Hollow One's fault, but I have played against some Hollow One players that got pretty upset when the variants didn't go their way. Like when they would Burning Inquiry or Goblin Lore and discard 2 Hollow Ones, they would get pretty tilted. But I kind of have to think about that in terms of Brood Scale and Tron. Like they're not necessarily tilted at me. They're just tilted that their deck didn't function the way they wanted it to. So I think I'm going to put Hollow One as the closest to A tier of the B tiers. Like, I think they're in general a little more outwardly salty than the Tron players, but it's again not salty at the opponent. I think A is a lot more getting salty at the opponent, where B is a lot more just getting salty in general. But it could very well be that Hollow One should be in the bottom of the A tier and just say that, like, saltiness. I think I'm going to do that. I think I like that a little bit more. And just say, like, if these players are getting salty more often in general, then I'm going to put them in A tier, where B is, like, more true neutral. On average, they're not really doing anything. Yeah. Okay, I like that. Next up is Goryo's Vengeance. So most recently, a lot of these Esper Goryo's decks. Where am I going to put Goryo's? There's been a huge surge in Goryo's players locally in the last few months. So I've had a lot more in-person local paper experience against Goryo's than a lot of other decks. But I don't think, I mentioned I don't really want to weigh those quite as much. I'd rather put more weight on experiences against players in big events. And most recently, I did play against Goryo's twice in Indianapolis, and both experiences were relatively positive. So I think I'm going to put Goryo's in C tier. And I think I'm going to put it above Belcher. So, like, down here, closer to D tier. All my Goryo's opponents have been pretty nice. They've been very understanding of the idea that if they don't draw fairly well, or if they don't draw the right spells before the discard, blah, 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 that their deck doesn't do a whole lot. Kind of signed up for the high risk, high reward. And I appreciate that understanding. So I'll keep them in C tier. Next up, we've got Tarmogoyf. This is representative of Jund mid-range of seasons past. The Rock. We've got Jund Saga in here. All those kind of archetypes. I think this is another abrasive one. I know I'm going to get some flack from the Grimflayer Discord, from anybody there that happens to watch this video, because there are obviously a lot of Tarmogoyf stands in there that would probably disagree with everything I'm saying. But my typical experience with Tarmogoyf players is if you're doing something that Thoughtseize into Tarmogoyf into Liliana the Veil just doesn't auto beat, then you're what's wrong with Magic. So I gotta put Tarmogoyf like pretty close to the Frog players. I think the Frog players are actually a little bit worse, but I think the Tarmogoyf players having like better overall catch-all interaction, especially for stuff on the permanent side, means that there's a little more nuance to the saltiness, because there's always like that bit of hope with Jund players, and that makes them a little bit nicer. But I think on average, most of the experiences I've had against Jund mid-range decks have been people like being salty that I played something in a way they couldn't interact profitably, like playing Gurmag Angler against Kolaghan's commands and lightning bolts and shrinking Tarmogoyfs with it, or playing a heavy control variant and cryptic commanding Liliana the Veil in response to a tick up, so they have to discard it. Stuff like that they get pretty annoyed about, so keeping them in the abrasive. Now we got Yawgmoth. Who are we going to tilt from the C4D Patreon? Yawg players. All right, so my local Yawgmoth experience has been fairly good. There is a local player that I won't name on the video, but anybody who knows me from the local scene will know exactly who I'm talking about. And I get along with this player so incredibly well. Really enjoy their company, no problems whatsoever. But the number of times that they have just like sideboarded in Thrun the Last Troll in Yawgmoth, or sided in Chameleon Colossus in Yawgmoth just to wreck whatever I'm doing, is definitely worth lowering the rating a little bit. But for the most part, I don't think I've had negative experience. I take that back. I've had a couple negative experiences with Yawgmoth, and it's mostly been players that kind of gave that air of, oh, you can't beat this when playing against a Frogtide variant. But I have had like neutral to good experience. So I think I'm gonna put, I think I'm gonna put Yawgmoth in B tier, right around Brood Scale and Emery. Maybe between Brood Scale and Tron. I think I've had more Yawgmoth salt directed towards me than something like Brood Scale, but not as much salt in general as like salty Tron players. So I think between those is a pretty good place in my mind. All right, Territorial Kavos. So looking at Zoo. What do we think of Zoo? Zoo. Few local Zoo players that have all been fairly nice, so I can't be too harsh about them. Zoo players that I've played in paper at big events have been fairly neutral. I can't think of a negative experience I've had against Zoo. I don't think I've ever had a Zoo opponent just like actively salt off. So I want to keep them in C tier. Obviously, they're not as like outwardly apologetic as say Hogak. So I think somewhere in the Through the Breach Lantern realm is pretty safe. I think I'm going to shift Hogak ahead of Belcher, and I think I'm going to move Zoo between Belcher and Through the Breach. I don't think I've had, like I said, any negative experiences whatsoever with Zoo, but I don't think I've had just like any real positive ones. But I've had like positive experiences with Belcher in testing and Hogak with players being like outwardly apologetic before we start. I haven't had those experiences with Through the Breach. So yeah, I think I'm going to keep Kavu right there, Zoo right there. Boros. Oh boy. Okay. In paper against Boros. Locally, I've had mostly good experiences. I don't think I've had a truly negative Boros experience, but I've had a decent amount of like neutral ones and a few kind of positive ones. At least one really positive one. Online against Boros has been, for lack of a better phrase, an absolute shit show. Boros players online are some of the saltiest individuals I have ever seen, where it's just like, oh, I hard cast an Oculus, and you start getting messages, oh, they always have it. You always have the Oculus. This deck's so stupid. Like, dude, I'm sorry. And obviously I'm not taking into account other players' experiences against Boros, but the amount of comments that I see or screenshots from players playing against Boros that have the Boros players just sending in angry DMs is kind of insane. So I think I'm going to put Boros in the abrasive category because of the sheer amount of online experiences. I think I put them ahead of Hollow One. If I was going sheerly off the number of bad experiences, then Boros would be a lot higher. But because I'm weighing in paper experience more than online experience, I've got to put Boros below Frog and Tarmogoyf because I've had less matches against Boros than I have against Frog and Tarmogoyf in paper. So that's my my Boros ranking. If you hate it, sucks to suck. Next up is Elvish Archdruid. So we've got elves in general. I think that most elves players I've played against have been pretty good, pretty chill. I can't think of a salty elves player. I can't think of any elves experience I've had that's been actually negative. I don't think I've had any bad elves experiences or any like over the top good elves experiences. So I'm kind of having to default a little bit to the elves players that I've played against and interacted with outside of games. And they've all been pretty positive people. So I either got to put them like below Burn. I think they're not as positive as Burn, but I think they're better than the Goryo's players. I got to put them like bottom of C tier. I think they are nicer than the Goryo's players. I don't think I've had enough good experiences with Elves players to put them into D tier. But like they're not doing anything wrong. They're reasonable individuals. They just haven't done enough to be in D tier. Blue-white control, Supreme Verdict. Blue-white control. I've had some good blue-white control experiences. Definitely had some condescension thrown from the blue-white players. Especially if you get into like a top deck Supreme Verdict scenario. So I think I'm going to put blue-white control in B tier. I think it is... I think it's saltier than Brood Scale. Saltier than Yogg. Like Tron is where you start getting it into salting against your opponent. I don't think blue-white control is salting against their opponents more often than not. They're more just like, oh, my deck didn't function. I didn't see the third land. I didn't see my fourth copy of Teferi, whatever the case may be. But not really directing it at whatever they're playing against. So I think I'm going to put blue-white control little below Yogg. And you kind of have to recognize that B tier is, for the most part, as neutral as it gets. Just not good, not bad. So it's not a bad place to be. It's just they don't really do anything one way or the other. Infect. I know I've had Infect players that got a little bit salty when you have like the third piece of removal or whatnot. But not, again, kind of like Brood Scale, Emery, not salty at you. Just, oh yeah, that's how I lose. Played against a few high-level Infect players, but not necessarily when they were playing Infect. So I can't carry those interactions over. I think Infect for me is going to be B tier, towards the bottom of B tier, so like closer to C tier. I think I haven't had salty Infect players. I've just had Infect players that were like, oh yeah, that's how I lose. Third removal spell. And I kind of respect that. They don't really get upset when they draw poorly because they know that they're a deck where you have to hit an Infector, and if you don't, you probably lose, and there's going to be a number of games that you just don't. So, yeah, I like that. Colossus Hammer for hammer time. Got some salty hammer opponents. I don't think I've had any like condescending hammer opponents. And I honestly don't think I've had a match against opponent, or I don't think I've had a match against a hammer opponent that was just over the top positive, like at all, or even like significantly positive. So I think I have to put them either in B or A. On average, if I'm weighing this more towards paper encounters, then I think I have to put hammer in B. If I was weighing it more towards online encounters, it could be argued towards like the bottom of A tier. But I think that I've had more paper opponents that were either neutral or like neutral plus, slightly on the positive side. So I think I want to keep hammer in B tier. I'm going to put them, I think I'm going to put them below blue-white control. Not as salty as Tron, but have some moments of frustration when you have like the right pieces of interaction at the right time, or they kind of get upset if they don't get to blow you out with like the 1 mana white instant that gives everything hexproof. Like they cast that and kind of give the, oh yeah, see, I got you, and then you respond with another removal spell, and they're like, ah, you know what I mean? Okay, Neoform. Neoform players are pretty reasonable. Played against a few recently that I think have kind of skewed my opinion of Neoform in a positive way. Even if they got a little frustrated during the match because I kind of had a lot of stuff, a lot of good interaction. They were not salty towards me in the slightest. Had really good conversations with them outside of the match. So that does play a part. And obviously that's a little biased towards the local scene because I might not have the opportunity to have those experiences with players in a big paper event. But I think in general, the Neoform opponents I've played against have been understanding that if they're up against a counterspell opponent and the counterspell opponent has multiple counterspells, GG, go next. So I'm going to put the Neoform players in C tier. And I think I'm going to put them ahead of Hogak because they were like genuinely nicer, not artificially nicer. Hogak players start the match off with, I'm sorry you got to play against this, or something like that, or I'm just playing this to win. The Neoform players were at least like more genuinely friendly before or after the match. I think I'm going to put them ahead. Okay. I think Neoform and Goryo's Vengeance are kind of along the same wavelength for the players inside of the match, but I'm giving Neoform the edge because I've had more experiences with those players outside of the match to push the decision a little bit. But both of them kind of understand, like, oh, if you have a bunch of pieces of interaction, I probably am not winning this game. Cool. Mill. Well, I will say Zeriok is an extremely nice human being. So that's a positive. I know a couple mill players locally that are really nice. So I got to put them fairly low on the ranking, somewhere in C or D tier. I haven't had a negative mill experience. I think I'm going to put mill. I think I'm going to put mill somewhere up. No, I'm going to put it below Hogak, above Belcher, because no mill player, I think, has ever apologized to anybody that they had to play against mill. So I can't put them on the same scale as Hogak. Actually, I probably have to put them around Lantern. That's like the same match, right? I'll put them ahead of Lantern because I've had nicer conversations with the mill opponents outside of the match, just like with Neo Brand to Goryo's Vengeance. But the mill players and the Lantern players, unlike Hogak, don't apologize to you that you had to play against mill or Lantern. And they're all three kind of these decks that function on an axis that the average game of Magic doesn't function on. And so the difference between them saying like, oh, I'm sorry you got matched into this, versus, okay, you got matched into this, tough luck on your part, is a pretty big deal when it comes to the niceness ranking. Next up, Samwise Gamgee, so Sam combo. And I'm going to kind of include a lot of creature-based combos here. So Heliod combo, Devoted Druid combo, a lot of those. And I think this is almost as neutral as you can get to me on the list. I've had Sam players that, or not necessarily Sam, but like Heliod players that would get frustrated if you had Kozilek's return in your sideboard and got to take out Auriok champions. I've had Sam players get a little bit frustrated if you could interact with all their birthing rituals. I've had Heliod players be fairly nice because they just wanted to like play a creature combo deck, or they wanted to play something janky like not Noxious Revival, but Postmortem Lunge. That was popular for a minute. So I got to put Samwise somewhere in the middle, somewhere like right around Yogg. It's really funny how a lot of these decks kind of group themselves together. For example, the big-brained mid-range decks like Frog and Jund, and to an extent Boros and Mardu, are all pretty abrasive. The creature combo decks with Sam and Yogg and Broodscale are all pretty neutral. The players playing a deck that fights on an unnatural axis, the Lantern Controls and Mills and Hogaks are all pretty, the Neoforms are like all pretty nice about it. Primeval Titan. Oh man. Okay. Let me preface this by saying Amulet Titan is S tier. And I don't think there is an average player base that is as salty towards everything around them as Amulet players on average. I have to keep stressing that. Because I've played against some players, like played against Peter Hassisian in Charlotte, who won GP RC Portland, extremely nice. One of the nicest amulet players I've ever met. Fantastic interaction, great ambassador for the archetype. Really enjoyed the conversations that I had with him. I've also played against so many Amulet Titan players that just got pissed off beyond belief that I would have a subtlety, or I would have a harbinger, or I would have anything, like any sort of interaction whatsoever. I don't know what it is about Amulet players that truly believe that they should not be allowed to be interacted with at all. They should be able to goldfish all day, every day, no questions asked, and are like actively getting upset when that gets disrupted. So, Amulet players, I'm sorry. This isn't going out to every single one of you specifically. Just know that you have got some Titan brethren out there that do not enjoy the game of Magic to the extent of some other people circulating the format. Rein them in, please. Please rein them in. Sowing Myco Spawn. So this is like mostly Eldrazi ramp. Obviously, there's some mono green Tron variants with Myco Spawn, but really Eldrazi ramp players. I've had some matches against Eldrazi that turned a little bit on the saltier side. I don't think I've had any just good interactions with Eldrazi. I think a lot of Eldrazi players that I've played locally and at bigger paper events have really taken a professional mentality to the deck. Like, they're registering Eldrazi because they think it's the best deck to win, and they want to take a very business-like approach. So there's really like not a lot of time for good conversation or being too friendly. Most of them, I'd say like almost all of them, have not actively been salty either. If things don't go their way, they kind of recognize cards like Harbinger of the Seas do a lot of work. So when they see one, oh yeah, bad luck. So I think I'm going to put Eldrazi somewhere in like the true neutral range. We could probably actually just slot it in as true neutral. Some of these other decks like Yawgmoth, I've had negative experiences and I've had positive experiences. So it really evens out. Kind of the same way with Samwise, but with Eldrazi ramp, the difference is just I don't think I've had a true negative or true positive experience. So the deck just kind of falls in the middle by default. Blink. So Overlord of the Baelmerk. Blink, blink, blink. All right. First off, Parker, I hope you see this video. I'm going to call you out real quick. Completely in the most friendly way possible. Not actually upset, so don't worry. But played against a Blink player at an RCQ a week or so ago. They wanted to be on the play going into top 8. It was the last round of the Swiss. They wanted to be on the play. We were both locked for top 8 at that point, and they wanted to play it out. I understand the decision. I'm not upset about the decision. I get it. Part of it, I'm pretty positive, was because they knew what I was playing. They knew I was on a frog deck. They had the advantage. It happens. I'm not using that as a determining factor for putting the deck in a negative direction on the tier list. I think that was just like a funny example that came up that could play a role. But on average, the Blink of players I've played against, I think have been positive on average. Thinking of all the players I've played against in big paper events, and we had a really crazy judge call on one of them in Charlotte, but the player was fantastic. Really, really nice player. But then again, I played against somebody that same event that kept trying to rush. Like, oh, we need to hurry up and make a move. We only have 15 minutes left. And it's like game 3 at a crucial point. So little bit of back and forth. I played against someone twice in an RCQ that was nice while they were winning the first time. Then we got paired again and they were a little saltier. But that was also top 8. So stakes were a little bit higher. I think this is going to be around Yawgmoth for me. I think there have just been like a variety of interactions, some positive, some negative, about an even number on both sides. So I think it kind of evens out. But I think I'm going to put them a little bit worse than Yawgmoth. I think on average, just tiny bit more on the unfavorable side, but effectively same as Yawgmoth. Bogles. My paper Bogles experience is pretty limited, surprisingly, because for whatever reason, not a lot of players bring Bogles to big paper events. And the interactions that I've had have been either really, really salty or friendly-ish. So like really salty in the form of like, you shouldn't have 3 abrupt decays as Jund, or I don't get why that Death Shadow I trampled over lives. This is stupid. The rules are stupid. Magic's stupid. You're stupid. Blah, blah, blah. Or the positive experiences that were mostly just like, now that I think about it, most of the positive experiences I think were like the same 2 players. So I think it's been a lot of salt and then like a couple positive experiences from the same people. So I got to put Bogles in like A tier. I think the average negative Bogles experience is more salty than the average negative Hollow One experience. But I think that I've played against more salty Hollow One players. But I think that's just a matter of how popular the deck has been in different metas compared to Bogles that like hasn't really had a popular moment like ever. So I'm going to put Bogles on the saltier side of Hollow One. Remember, the farther left you go in every category, the closer you get to the category above it. So Bogles is like on the lower end of abrasive, closer to neutral, but more abrasive than Hollow One. Flame of Anor. So this is any of the Wizards builds, really. Ever since Flame of Anor has gotten printed, we've seen Izzet Wizards, we've seen Grixis Wizards, variety of different Snapcaster shells, Tamiyo shells, Thundertrap Trainer shells, whatever the case may be. So how do I want to rate this one? Obviously, I've had a lot of really good experiences with players like Sven Speeder Sven online, plays a lot of Izzet, hangs out in the chat from time to time. Really good ambassador for the blue-red draw 2 tribal archetype. I don't think I've had any negative experiences against any sort of Wizards build, but I have had a few positive ones. So I think this goes into C tier for me. They're not actively like apologizing for playing against them, but they haven't been salty. So I think I'm going to put them right here with Elves. A little bit nicer overall in terms of generic interaction with them. So I think that's fair. Death Shadow. Oh, God. Oh, God. Death Shadow has got probably a reputation right along with Primeval Titan and Amulet Titan as being like the deck that people want to play when they want to promote themselves as being big brained. Like, oh, I'm the smartest person in the room. I'm playing Death Shadow. My decisions matter. And I definitely don't think that's accurate. I punt plenty with the deck. That will not change anytime soon. So where do I want to rank the shadows? I have had a number of salty experiences with opposing shadow players. So I think it's another abrasive style deck. But it hasn't been as much as like Hollow One. I think I've had more negative experiences with shadow players than positive ones. The positive ones have been really good, but they have also been with players that either I knew locally or knew me from making shadow content. So that really, really, really hedges the argument. So I think I have to put shadow in abrasive because I've had more negative experiences on average with people that didn't fall into those categories. But they weren't as salty as Hollow One and like Hollow One and Bogles. So I think the bottom of A tier, closer to B tier. Omnath. I had a really good experience with an Omnath player in Indianapolis. We're on like a backup feature match. They were really friendly. So that gives a bit of a buff. Haven't played against Omnath too terribly much in paper. Mostly online because that was like beginning of COVID, I think, when Omnath really started showing up. Might have been before, I can't remember. But Omnath in general, it's been more positive than B tier, so it's definitely somewhere in C tier. I don't think I've ever had an Omnath player actively get salty. All right, so I think I'm gonna put Omnath in like the Hogak range. Like, for Hogak, I've had players that would actively say sorry for playing against this deck. I've never had someone say that with Omnath, obviously, but the general disposition of the Omnath players on average has been more positive than the Hogak players. The Hogak players are preemptively, hey, I apologize, and then business, kind of like the Eldrazi ramp players. But they get a lot of bonus for saying I'm sorry. The Omnath players don't say I'm sorry. They're kind of business, but they're nicer. They're business casual. I think that's a good way of describing it. They're business casual. Storm. Played against Young Dingo and Charlotte, who was really nice. That was obviously like an easy D tier experience. Had a couple salty-ish Storm players. But I also have to recognize, like, the deck I'm playing is pretty aggressively slanted towards beating Storm, whether I want it to or not. They weren't necessarily salty at me, just a little bit in general. So I think I got to put them in like the affinity infect range. I think I'm putting them below infect because they're in that range of decks that have like had a little bit of salt. The positive experiences have outweighed. The salt wasn't directed at me, but I've had more positive experiences against Storm than I have against Infect and Affinity. Yeah, I like that. Slick Shot Show Off. So this is Prowess. I've got a pretty high rating of Prowess players. I think that for the most part, they've been really nice individuals. I don't think I've played against anybody on Prowess that's had a negative experience. I don't even think I've played against a Prowess player that like actually got salty at all. And I know this is one of those cases where I've heard people saying otherwise, but again, it's my tier list of my personal experiences, and I have not played against a Prowess opponent that I think I would actively consider salty. So if they're net neutral with some positive experiences, they've got to be C tier. And I think we're going somewhere around Omnath to Elves range. I think I'm going between Goryo's and Neobrand. I think that the players, all three of these decks kind of understand that if their opponent has got the right interaction at the right time, there's nothing you can do about it. But I think that the Neobrand and Prowess opponents I've played against have generally been nicer. And they are about the same. I might put Prowess ahead of Neobrand just because I've played against more nice opponents. But on average, I think kind of the level of niceness is about the same. Dredge. Okay, this is going to be a bit of a controversial one. So I don't think the Dredge opponents that I have played against on average have been salty. But I do think a decent number of them have just been dicks. Like, have just been like condescending about everything going on in the match. And so for that, I believe I have to put them in A tier somewhere. Now, obviously, I've played against some that were friendly, but I think more of them were just like, oh yeah, you can't do anything about this. Or, it doesn't matter if you got the spell bomb now. I've already got 14 power in play on turn 2, whatever the case may be. So I think, how do I rank being salty about the game plan versus just being a jerk in general? I think I've got to put being a jerk a little bit higher on the tier list. So like above, man, I think I got to go above Bogles, below Boros. I don't think Bogles players are jerks in general. I think just on average, if things weren't going their way, they got pretty salty. I think the majority of the Dredge players I've played against were kind of jerks in general. And I think the Boros players on average were kind of salty and a little bit abrasive. But the Dredge players didn't get as salty as the Boros players. They just kind of had the condescension going for them. So I'm good with that. Living End. Living End. I had pretty good experiences against Living End. Oh, wait. I've also had some salty ones. It's always like a couple players that kind of mess up the entire tier for you. I think the salty Living End players were more salty than the happy ones were happy. So to me, that's a sign of low B tier or A tier, or high B tier, A tier. I don't think I can put them in A tier. I don't think on average they've been as abrasive or as frustrating as the shadow players. So we're definitely going B tier, and I think it's not as salty as Tron. More salty than Hammer. I think the Living End players that I've played against in paper have been a group that really thought they were like metagaming a tournament and just had like this ultimate deck choice that was gonna steal everything. And then when you interact with them, it's like, oh, well, this isn't how Modern's supposed to be. You're supposed to be playing Boros, and I'm supposed to have a really good time into this, and now you're not, and I don't agree with that. You know what I mean? Then last but not least, Merfolk. I haven't played against Merfolk in a minute. Do I have any negative? I don't think I have negative experiences against Merfolk. I think most of the experiences I've had that could be classified technically as negative have been a little more on like the condescension route, where it's just like, here, you can't deal with this, but it's not salt. I don't think I've ever had them get salty over a sweeper effect. This is a tough one. Like, Dredge had a lot of condescension. Merfolk has got like medium amounts of condescension. So we've got to put it on the lower, or like the left side of B tier to the low side of A tier, somewhere in there. And I think I'm ranking this based off of like A tier being more aggression placed towards the opponent, which actually, I think I got to move Tron up. I think the more I think about it, Merfolk is the bottom of B tier because there's been a lot of condescension from Merfolk, but not a lot of outward aggression, or not a lot of like not a lot of saltiness placed towards the opponent. Tron has had a good bit of salt placed towards the opponent, and I think that's enough to move them up to A tier. Okay, I like this. I think my rankings are pretty solid. As always, let me know in the comments down below how you think of the rankings. I think this has been an absolute like mental gymnastics match to navigate. But I feel very happy with how my list turned out. I think anything that ends up in a relative bell curve like this, you know, has got some amount of validity, at least in my mind, to it. I really got a kick out of how, as this went on, more and more archetypes really started developing in the scale system here, in the ranking system. How we saw like a lot of combo creature decks get grouped together, a lot of goldfish decks get grouped together. And I wonder if you can take a guess as to that, like saying something about the type of people that generally gravitate towards these decks, or how the gameplay affects their attitude as the match goes on. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like, maybe consider commenting, subbing to the YouTube channel. Greatly appreciates letting me know what kind of stuff y'all are enjoying for future videos. As always, hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Stay safe, enjoy some good food and company. I will catch y'all back live later. Adios for now.